because we're very good at talking to each other about the information we collect. But to have an objective organization sort of separate from the collection aspect of it, or the information gathering aspect of it, so it could focus on that, and then we could mass efforts into creating information or taking that information and creating actual knowledge, and then getting it out into the wider world, which is where it needs to be.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 1CA podcast. I'm your host, Sean Acosta, and today's guest is Major Ian Duke, author of the paper titled Civil Knowledge Battalion, Integrating Civil Affairs with the Information Environment. Major Duke commissioned as a military intelligence officer in 2007. He deployed in 2008 as a research manager on a human terrain team for Task Force Kandahar. He served in the 75th Ranger Regiment from 2011 to 2015 on regimental staff, deploying twice to Afghanistan. In 2014, he attended Civil Affairs Assessment and Selection. He has deployed with the 98th Civil Affairs Battalion to Peru as a SIMC team commander. In 2019, he graduated from Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation with a Master's of Military Arts and Science. He currently serves as the Fox Company Commander in the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion.
Sean, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I know we were just talking a little bit offline about all this stuff, so we decided to turn it on and start capturing some of the good stuff. We're talking about the Civil Information Battalion that you posed during your paper. So I don't know if you want to kind of just start with the overall thought of what made you write this and what the concept of this Civil Information Battalion is and what led you to it.
So one of the, I guess, keys to it was that just to see all the information that the teams are collecting to be utilized outside of the CA regiment, because we're very good at talking to each other about the information we collect. But to have an objective organization sort of separate from the collection aspect of it, or the information gathering aspect of it, so it could focus on that, and then we could mass efforts into creating information or taking that information and creating actual knowledge, and then getting it out into the wider world, which is where it needs to be.
Right.
And I think that's where civil affairs really needs to start heading outside of ourselves into other elements.
Yeah, I agree with that. Your prior background was military intelligence, correct?
Yes.
And so having that background, and you guys have, military intelligence has something similar to this. Is that kind of what led you to that, your previous branch and experience? Right.
There's definitely some correlations to it where the collectors don't necessarily do the analysis.
Right.
So it keeps that separation, and that makes sense for a lot of different agencies. Intelligence agencies work that way as well, and so that just allows people to, again, mass efforts and have focused efforts on one thing or the other, because one craft doesn't necessarily transfer to the other. And also one of the things I saw at the tactical battalions was that the teams were doing great things, but then there'd be a stalling point between the teams and the actual battalion sim section, and because the companies aren't designed to actually process things at a high level. They can process things, but just not at that high level where it can be used by the interagency, et cetera.
That makes sense. I think that's one of the things I've noticed in my experience too, is we, especially within Special Warfare Center School and teaching those things. Like civil reconnaissance is one of the tactical mission tasks that we teach. However, analysis piece, which is pretty critical, is kind of glossed over.
Right, and we can see. I think we started talking about the instead of the CA NCO or the CANCO, it was the Human Network Analyst or something like that.
I've heard something like that. I believe 95th is now calling them Civil Reconnaissance NCOs.
Okay,
I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what they're referring to them as.
Okay, well, so a Civil Reconnaissance NCO, I could see that person, being tactically proficient, focusing on that, and then I see it, this separate unit being a second life for somebody. Either you could come up through your training, you're better at analysis than you are at collecting, because that just happens with a lot of people. They could focus on that from the beginning, or you get someone who's done a lot of recon work, and then before they move on to another job in the 3 shop or somewhere else in the greater, or get out of the Army altogether, we can take what they've collected and learned over a career, and then analyze it, make things at that, because you learn so many things as you move on in your career, and you see where things would have been more valuable later on, and that's where that analyst can add more to the picture. For example, if all the folks in proponency, the DA civilians, it'd be amazing if they applied their analysis to current information.
Right.
For example, I think that might have interesting results.
No, I would agree with that. I think also one of the things that I don't know if it hinders this, but I think we could do a better job at is just that kind of that pathway of, okay, even the information we have now where it's analyzed, like we send that up, sometimes it kind of gets lost in the stratosphere of information or wherever it is.
Right.
So we don't ever see exactly what is this civil information actually doing for a commander to update their common operating picture? How are they utilizing this information to make better decisions, right? And then with that, I think maybe these battalions could assist in that and then push kind of, hey, this is some more of the civil data that we would like to collect. The commander really likes this, or et cetera. Could you guys focus in on this civil data more? So
a couple podcasts back with Chaplain Machichi and Steron, they talked about how storyboards weren't cutting it, and they did a whole survey of the CA enterprise and found that people didn't have confidence that their information was being utilized. And so this would be an element that would be mandated to focus on that and be rated on their ability to manipulate and integrate that into other agencies. And so I think it would help attack that problem, or at least minimize that problem. I don't think it's ever going to go away, collecting information that perhaps isn't as relevant as you thought it was when you first collected
Right.
it. However, if you have something separate that can be, and it's not just a repository, but it's an active repository.
Right.
So I had a few lines of effort where you do the human network analysis, which would be kind of your active stuff where you could stay as current as possible using AI techniques, machine learning, all the new excellent fancy stuff, and then turn that into engaging networks at a higher level that teams aren't capable of doing, and frankly they're not designed to do. Teams are designed to operate at embassies, et cetera, but to get the knowledge integrated into areas where people will see value in having civil reconnaissance elements all globally positioned, that's a whole other level of analysis that needs to take place. And I think you need a dedicated unit to be able to do it. Whether it's a battalion or not, that's kind of arbitrary. I just thought of battalion because it's an 05 and that's it's a commander and it's something the Army understands and can probably wrap their head around what it would kind of look like, but it doesn't have to be that necessarily.
So you mentioned the lines of effort in your paper. Could you expand on those a little bit more? Okay,
so yeah, I just noted three of them, and the first one being human network analysis, which the 95th and others are doing excellent work on. The battalion I'm part of, the 83rd, we have an excellent sim section, but it's it's undermanned, and they're not capable of doing high-level interagency work that would be really benefit the teams. And so to have something dedicated to that, to bring in other assets, that would be a line of effort right there. And then second, the network engagement, to actually engage those folks, to spend all that time integrating that knowledge and reaching out and keeping other sorts of networks alive. That would be a second line of effort. And then the third would be continuity and professional development. So the continuity piece, that's where you get a little bit of repository work. That's where you also get knowing why we've been in a country for 5, 10, 30 years, what the changes have been over time. And of course, with professional development, we can see, I think there's room for analysis of what, for example, a really good CA NCO, what's their future path after CA? What are they going to do when they get out of the military? There's plenty of options, and they should be able to feed back into the system. I see this as an organization that should be living organization that should be able to, actively reach out to former members who are creating work that's worthwhile keeping and developing over time.
Right. So, I guess maybe, what would your response be to some people that say we have some of those capabilities or assets at battalion level now? Is it just a size? So when we're talking about like human network analysis, we're looking at like sim cells or H&A cells. I think at the brigade, 95th, they have some of those.
Right.
And then when we're talking about kind of the network engagement, that kind of falls in line with that a little bit too. Maybe reaching out to unified action partners like civil liaison teams in the CMOCs at battalion level. Is it just a size capability at that point, or is it a manning capability at the battalions? What do you?
So, well, it's both.
Okay.
So you need some massing.
Okay.
So we need to take from if it was for example, if we couldn't grow the force, we should take some of the elements from sim sections now and mass them together.
Okay.
And then you can flex them to different spots. For example, our sim chief Jason Wagner. I mean, he's got a minimal team, but if he was able to call in a few more people to flex on a certain area over a given period of time, that would immensely help the effort. And there should be a unit that he should be able to reach out to in order to be able to do that. So I'm not saying completely eliminate a sim person at a battalion, but if we could just, so getting the people there, and then you could do specialized training for those people.
Right.
And then there's all sorts of things where someone could focus on it for a while. And then if someone gets good, there should be lines where they become possible DA civilians that are specialized in it. Because the real power of military intelligence is not necessarily the soldiers. It's the continuity through the analysts, the civilian analysts. And if anyone looks behind the curtain at any joint task force, they see it's these civilians providing continuity. Because the officers and the NCOs, they come and go too quickly.
No.
And they're too junior, quite honestly. And the senior ones have been in and out of multiple jobs, and they're more manager/leaders at that point, as opposed to dedicated 10, 20-year analysts that have a wealth of knowledge. And so, but of course, the wealth of knowledge comes with risks as well, because you can get, they can stagnate.
Right.
But that's the point of trying to have tension between the different lines of effort. But that's a problem for the organization and the leadership of the organization itself.
So I think that's a problem. I know I've had a lot of like personal discussions with people about that same thing, where they've kind of talked about this, I guess, split, right? Who wants to go down the command path and who wants to go down the specialization path, right? So they've talked about NCOs and officers being specialized. It's more, I think we discussed it more in like an AOR specific type thing, where you kind of build up through an ASCC or a TSOC. But I think this specialty skill here would fall in line with that. And I think it also goes back to another thing within the regiment that we could address, right, is advanced skills after the schoolhouse and CA going through the qualification course. What advanced skills are we providing to our non-commissioned officers and officers to do that? So in this case, analysis, whatever it is, these analytical skills, whether, I don't know who that would be partnering with, but that speaks to another issue as well that we could maybe address here.
Right, yeah, I envision there's multiple people to partner with in order to get those advanced skills, to include just opening ourselves up to the interagency.
Right.
To learning what gaps they have, or, for lack of a better term, what the customers want, what people are getting out of the information. Because if we don't have a dedicated element that's constantly trying to figure out what the receivers of that information, of that knowledge, are doing with it, getting from it, we don't really know what extra. We're kind of guessing at what tasks people need to focus on in order to advance, and so it seems to make sense that, some of these things make sense, especially the movement to civil recon.
Right.
It seems to make sense because there's some doctrine out there, and I know we both know people that have said, "Hey, look, let's get some big Army civil recon or just reconnaissance doctrine to help develop civil reconnaissance itself." Well, then let's get some other analyst work to figure out exactly how to manipulate our information and make it better, and make it more usable, and make it more relevant, and frankly more credible.
Right.
And once it gets to that level, and we start having those conversations, I think we'll be much better off. And giving, you're right, just like you said, I think you said split at the beginning of your question, because then you can start identifying talent to go one way or another.
Exactly. Yeah, talk about talent management, which I know is a big push in the Army right now.
Sure.
It seems to fall in line with that. And the other portion of this, which you were alluding to, is the experience, right? The continuity piece. I know as a team sergeant, when I left CA team, that was just when I was starting to feel like I had a pretty firm grasp on analyzing some of the material, and a lot of that was just trial and error. It was just, hey, I send this up, and someone's like, no, that's not the information we're looking for. We want you to kind of hone in on this or articulate it in this manner. So by the time guys are really developing those skills, they're usually moved off of a team. So,
right.
Yeah.
I'll almost guarantee each team leader will say that for sure. Speaking from the officer perspective, they get one turn and then you're done or something like that. Or if you're lucky, you get 2 turns. I'm sure a lot of officers would like a chance to do that, and maybe even hone their craft at doing that. Spend a little more time doing the recon side, and then I'm sure there's others that would go, "Hey, look, I'm getting out because I'm going to do more analytical side," or I think our generated knowledge would have been better in the NGO sector. Well, they would be a perfect candidate to spend a couple years seeing if they can integrate that knowledge into the NGO sector, how and or why, and figure that out. I think that would benefit the regiment as well, because civil information or civil knowledge, it's such a huge spectrum. We haven't really, I don't think, identified what exactly is truly relevant for a combatant commander at this point, and it's changing so fast, so radically fast. It seems like we're always behind, so I don't know if it's something you'll ever get ahead of. But there's definitely something we can't just stop and just say, well, this is what it is. This is the perfect size unit to civil affairs itself, to be able to change and adapt to the new information environment.
No, I agree with it, and I think that just understanding that that's one of the proprietary things that we bring to the U.S. Army is gathering that civil data and then providing that to commanders. And one of the 2 tactical mission tests we teach here, reconnaissance and civil engagement, right? But we always talk to students like, who in here thinks that CA is the only people that does civil engagements? Half of them raise their hands. We're like, you're kind of all wrong. Like any platoon leader can do that. Anybody else in the Army can go and do that. However, no one else in the Army is gathering civil information through civil reconnaissance. That's a uniquely civil affairs capability. So why not, develop this so that we can bring a better product to commanders and the Army.
Yeah, exactly. Or making sense of it. So PLs can go out there and do that, infantry PLs or captains, and do those engagements. But to really complete that civil considerations aspect of MDMP and continual IPB, it's the CA guy that has to be, or person needs to be continually churning that and taking that information, turning it into knowledge. So, and then, that's where if you get a specialist analyst to be able to push stuff to. You take it to the higher level, and then hopefully the combatant commander can see the value out of it.
And those guys know what the value is in that information, so they can articulate it or analyze it and shape it in a way that is better.
Especially if we could measure it over time with some continuity, and then push some metrics out, as opposed to being a guessing game of, hey, we've got the civilians out of the way, therefore you can get on with your combat operations. We got to start trying to measure, and I think you need a dedicated element in order to be able to attempt those high-level types of analysis.
No, I agree with you. I think every team that goes into any country, the baseline data set that they pull is when they first get there, and then what they're measuring it off of 6 months later is data from 6 months ago. So,
and their measurement, what they're measuring changes. And so who's got that continuity? I doubt it's the regional SIMCs, although they attempt to do as good a job as possible. But I would guess that they're undermanned as well, and they're a little bit too tactical as well. It needs to be pulled back to something a little bit more objective. And now, if the TSOCs were doing it or the COCONs themselves were doing it, there might be less of a concern. But I think the only people that are really focused on the civil side is literally people who are in civil affairs. You'll see 500 to 1,000 people sections in the J2 section of the various COCOMs, but the civil people considering the civil aspects of things will be a tenth that, if that. And so,
So this battalion, we talked a little bit about like what it would, I guess, be task organized under. So would that be? Do you see this falling under
force comm, is it a USOC asset? Is it both? Does it matter?
So a little bit of honesty here. I think what it really came from was that I did this paper on civil affairs knowledge or information in the information environment, and then I went to the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion, which is the only force comm civil affairs battalion. It's an amazing battalion because it's a global battalion.
Right.
It's very unique, and it's got this unique capability to, we feed both SOCOM, we feed force comm, we bridge a lot of aspects. And we were about to be absorbed possibly into one or another at a given time, and it still may happen, so it's a little bit up in the air, but so I could see that could have just transitioned into a whole sim battalion there. So I was just kind of thinking out of the box that's what that could be, and that SOCOM would own it. But SOCOM is not the only customer for this, or not even the main customer for this, because SOCOM should really be a supporting element to the larger effort, which is the conventional force.
Right.
The conventional force is there for a reason. They do the main effort, and so I put a lot of thought into it. Once you put it to me, who's going to own it? And through the Civil Affairs Association, that's a tough question.
Right.
So I almost see now that I think UC needs to create their own, and I think there should be one at USASOC, and I think Forcecom should have one as well. And then I think there should be really a mandate or a memorandum of understanding where they can attempt to work together. There should be one leader, though, of course, in order to unify that command, which is going to be almost impossible.
Right.
Who's paying this bill? But unifying it, if only for evaluation purposes. And the higher ranking person who's doing that evaluation, the better, so we can have more accountability. But that said, all of them need to contribute to it, and it's almost like the DIA is for the military. The DIA is a military organization, but it doesn't fall under one of the COCOMs, really. So you can kind of sidestep SOCOM, because the easy answer, I think, from if you're in the 95th, is we'll put it at the 95th.
Right.
But it's not so easy when you come from USACAPOC, I don't think. And USACAPOC really has it's the main effort in many ways. Because of their overall capability, their rank structure, quite frankly. And so if they're not part of it or bought into it or significantly putting effort into it, I don't think it will have as great a result as possible. That said, though, I still think it should be tried, even if one doesn't want to try it.
Right. So, yeah, I would agree. I think we probably couldn't put an asset like this and just leave it under one. The difficulty, like you said, is going to be unifying that across all three.
Mine's bigger than mine would like to battle that out, I'm sure. 'Cause that's always what happens, right? You put the task org up on the thing, and then everyone sits there and talks about task org.
Right.
And then the brief's half over, and then it's like, oh yeah, we have a mission too. Okay. As long as you get the task org set.
Exactly.
So unfortunately, I got to leave that. That's a tough question to leave on the table, but
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's an answer right now for that, but
it'd be
just
good
something to ponder, think about.
yeah, it'd be good to see that battle, to see who'd like to own that.
Yeah.
more. Yeah.
So another thing with this is we've talked about the reconnaissance piece that feeds this information into it. Do you see? I know some of the MI brigades would have their own like reconnaissance assets where they had scouts there, like alerts or something along those lines. Do you see the need for an organic reconnaissance asset, or do you think that we'll just leave that up to the teams operating in country to feed back into this? Or even outside of CA teams, we mentioned platoon leaders gathering simple information as well.
Right.
How do you kind of envision that information being fed in?
So in a way, I see that as mission creep.
Okay.
So I'd want to keep it as focused as possible, and solely focused on analysis and then integration. I guess you see. I see your point about how could they collect information from a
Right.
platoon leader, for example. Well, I still think there should be a organic CA person there helping to feed that up.
Right.
Because there should be a mechanism in place. And I think we'll be overburdening, because then it will turn into something that just feeds individual BCTs.
Right.
And it might get diluted. The mission might get diluted at that point. It'd be good if it was acted more as a standalone analysis, reach back integration machine that did its own, that that had its own kind of or structure, or had its own culture to it,
Right.
had its own momentum to it, as opposed to getting into. It gets too tempting because you also see when some units, even SMU units, when they start adding other elements, it's much easier to add another little capability to it. We'll do a small group of this because then I don't have to ask other people for it.
Right.
I think this unit should be forced to ask other people for it, and people should be forced to ask them for it, because then you get the push-pull.
Right.
And that's what. So it's more of a process thing as opposed to making more other organic assets that people will get jealous of, and then you get into rice bowl conversations.
Yeah, maybe that link is just through the S9s at the BCTs or whatever it is. They can feed that information, or vice versa, how
Sure.
that's fed, whatever it may be. But yeah, I would agree.
Might make the S9 more relevant. Might make them tie
Yeah.
into the bigger picture. It might make put more pressure on the SimC or the CAPE team or CA team that gets attached to that BCT.
Right.
To show that they're capable of feeding these different systems.
Right. I would agree with that. The other thing that I think everyone thinks of when they think of civil information or civil knowledge is the platforms. So I'll just ask the question, right? What is your take on platforms now as they are or repositories for civil information? Where do you think we need to improve on that? Is it? I know there's some new systems coming out, but to be honest with you, I don't know what they are or not.
So I did the human terrain system,
Right.
12 years ago now? Something like that. And they had DSIG's human terrain, something back then. So I think DSIG's is the answer, right? It's always been the answer. And it's coming out.
I think that's where the Army's going with it. D6A is the answer now.
2022,
Yeah.
is it now? So 2024, something like that. So regardless, whether it's Palantir, whether it's CASE, which is an interesting system. I like the open source stuff. As long as we can have some sort of continuity with it, that'd be kind of nice. But I would say, though, I think it would alleviate a little bit of that, because if you had this unit dedicated to that, they could manage multiple systems and then have to deal with that. And then, then you can measure the effectiveness of one over the other, or the effect of cutting one off and then starting another one. We just feel the end pain of it, as from my experience on the tactical level.
Right.
It's really painful, but I think we don't almost have that objective source that can say, no, it's painful for this reason and that reason.
Right.
So we shouldn't do it, and here's the qualification. But that said, proponency is making some strides, though it's glacial pace, it seems, because by the time it seems like they make one change, and by the time they're on to their next change, your team leader time or team starting time's over.
Right.
So it seems to go, yeah.
I think that's another pro, if you will, for the Civil Knowledge Battalion, is it would act as that. So all the frustrations that everyone in civil affairs has with these different systems, depending on which COCOM you're working for, that would probably alleviate a lot of it. Right? So we talk about this information sharing, and everyone looks to this software to do that. So, but if you have these organic battalions that are there, that's their sole purpose, is to analyze this information and house it, and when you need it, you go to them. When they distribute it, however they distribute it,
Yeah.
I think that would alleviate a lot of the issues that we currently have with the information sharing.
Yeah, I think you're describing continuity.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely.
And so
Right.
continuity doesn't have to be, we need a million-year contract for Palantir. Continuity can be, hey, we have a shared folder, or we have a bunch of hard copies of stuff that's been done in Area A for 10 years, and it's so-and-so's job to go read all that stuff, get a so what, and then brief the new team that's going to go in next month. And so that's a little bit of continuity, because I've had a couple of experiences where you go to a country and the folks there in the partner nations interagency, they know who you are, who was there before, what effects they had, what they want from you. So not only do they know your mission or are trying to guide you on their mission, with that they have a huge advantage over you. And it's not, and you don't want to turn it into something adversarial like that. You want to walk in saying, yeah, no, I'm fully versed. We did this before, and it had this positive or negative effect, and then you can work with them,
Right.
as opposed to having them trying to to play a team that's only in there for 6 months.
Yeah.
So the continuity has to come outside of the team that's there for 6 months.
Right.
I'm not sure. I think we can both agree, trying to do the work Civil Affairs does, civil reconnaissance and engagement, long-term knowledge of changes over time in a given area, takes more than 6 months.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so it takes multiple years. So the only way to do that is to have long-term continuity analysis over time.
I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have, right? We have the persistent engagements in these theaters
Right.
and in these countries. It's bodies are persistently there, but sometimes that information that we've gathered is not always there, right? And that's kind of the piece. I generally knew what the team prior to me did.
Right.
2 teams prior,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah.
3 teams, probably.
Forget
not.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you meet the guys, I was there 4 years ago. I don't even remember what happened. And they kind of walk away. Well, you should know who they met,
Right.
who's been met with consistently,
Yeah.
who's changed positions in what given area. And not only does that only give the team an advantage in being able to network, or to engage networks,
Right.
but it also shows respect to the partner nation,
No, absolutely.
right? That we're not fickle, and that we're not, because it's very easy to have a reputation for being there only when, they're needed.
Right.
And I think we play a large role in that, like you said, the persistent presence. I mean, we should ask the question, what is persistent presence really,
Yeah.
right? It's someone you know over a long period of time. Well, if you keep changing out the faces, what do you really know of that person over a long time? It's pretty...
I would agree. I'm an advocate, sort of, for longer deployments, although I think that's a hard sell.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have a continuity or a
Yeah.
process for continuity. I don't know if that has to be the answer.
Probably not even the answer then.
'Cause I had a friend of mine, Andy Alcacer, throw out to him is that he kind of questioned me on how is that even possible? How's an NCO coming off a team going on to this civil engagement or civil knowledge battalion going to be able to conduct reach back? Well, that person should be able to find out what the network was, reach back to those people that they've known for a while, and then at least keep the team up to speed about who they're able to
Right.
keep in contact with. And now with, I think it's just an acknowledgement that social media is way more powerful than we thought,
Yeah.
and we need to incorporate it into the way we conduct operations in the information environment.
Right.
And that's not weaponizing it, so to speak. I think it's just utilizing it the way it's supposed to be used. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are in long-term groups now, and I think that's one way of doing it. Because, say, if you went to a country that I'm going to go to in 6 months, well, you went there 6 years ago, but you're still in a, just throwing out their WhatsApp group with a few of those people. How are you going to get me a quality introduction to those people where I'm
Right.
almost vetted instantly?
Right.
That's a way to do it. Even if you went over to an NGO or you went over to an interagency or something like that, that could be a way of doing that.
Right.
I mean, this might be pie in the sky thinking, but I think that's one powerful tool for continuity, especially in the job
No, I
we're
agree.
attempting to do.
Capitalizing on those relationships that have already been built. I mean, we know generally the first 30 to 60 days of that rotation is just trying to build some sort of relationship with those individuals within
Right.
those friendly networks in that area. And then after that, you got a couple more months of, all right, we got these networks and relationships built. Let's start trying to utilize some of these things to assist. And then you've got a couple months really a month or two to figure out or to do whatever it is that you think you can do during that. And then it's packing your bags
And then
ready to come back.
transition.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly right. And to build confidence. And so you could do this, right? So even if someone has a bad rotation, you could skip that person out of that group and just go, yeah, sorry about that guy. He got PNG'd or kicked out,
Right.
he wasn't the greatest guy. And then you can maintain that network, repair the damage,
Right.
send someone, better ostensibly back in and reintroduce them again and, accelerate the engagement with that network once
Yeah,
again.
absolutely.
And monitor changes that way too. And I think the only way to do it really is to have that dedicated, again, like a salesman here, I guess.
No, I would agree. I think you're onto something here, and hopefully someone somewhere listens to this and reads your paper, and then someone with a lot more power than we have can start to put these things into motion.
Yeah, that would be cool. Sometimes you need organizational change to really
Right.
shake up. Like you reorganize your house and you think differently or something like that. And so I'm not talking about adding new people. You don't have to add new people, but just utilizing the people we have already far more effectively for the information environment.
I would agree with
For
that.
sure.
Yeah. All right, sir. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up at this point. I just want to say thank you for coming onto the podcast and discussing these things. Honestly, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting across from the table from me,
Yeah.
but I've read your paper numerous times. I really, really enjoyed it, and I think that this is something that I personally could get behind and support. And like I said, I hope someone else somewhere reads it.
Cool, Sean. Okay. Hey, thanks a lot.